Hey everybody, welcome to episode 46 of the AskDAP show, where we answer your Volkswagen Audi questions. On this episode, we talk about what pads and rotors to use on your daily that you track sometimes, Mark 7 reliability, and DSG mechatronic units.
On four wheels via VwVortex. My Mark 6 GTI horn seems to be working intermittently, more often not working. When I press the steering wheel, I hear a click, but that's it. I've checked the fuses already and nothing is blown. All the buttons on the steering wheel work consistently. Another data point may be relevant is that I went in for the clock spring recall a couple months ago. Any idea on how to troubleshoot and find the cause?
Okay, so if this issue happened directly after you had your recall done, I would say it could be related to the install or something that was touched during the install. It's still a possibility if it happened a little bit later, but I would say it's less likely. Either way, regardless of which one it is, you're going to have to diagnose specifically what's happening. Sounds like the fact that you've looked into it some, but not all the way to track down what's going on. So what you would want to do in this situation is you seem like you've started to look into it, as in you're saying that you hear the relay click when you hit the horn. And that situation seems to be looked at. What you would want to do next is then go in, disconnect the horn. There are two of them, keep in mind. There's a high and a low horn. You would want to disconnect the horn and either you can run power and ground to it, so ground it on one side and then jump power to it to see if the horn works. And also, obviously, because your issue is intermittent, maybe keep it running for a little bit longer than you normally would, just to see if it cuts in and out. Once you do that and you've determined that to be either good or bad, you can then test to make sure you have power coming from the, you'll need a voltmeter, and you can check to see, have somebody press the horn while it's unplugged, check with a voltmeter to see if it's delivering power to the connector. So that will help kind of guide you in a direction to track down specifically what horns you need. I'll put a link to the horns for a Mark 6 GTI in the description below. You can check them out.
Josiah via shopdap.com says, I have a 2009 Mark 5 GTI with 62,000 miles. I've noticed from a standstill the car seems to surge in power almost like it's catching and then slipping. This is only in the lower RPMs. This goes for the same for reverse. I have also noticed that parked on any type of incline, I have a harder than normal time putting it into gear. I'm thinking it's the mechatronics unit, but I'm not sure if it's covered under warranty or not. Any advice would be appreciated.
All right, so on a Mark 5 GTI, this is going to be a DSG transmission. What it sounds like to me, this is just based on your description, that you have a bad mechatronics unit. What would happen with the early mechatronics units in 2009 was usually, I think they were either resolved or close to resolved by that point. What would happen is you would start going and it would almost feel like it was slipping and then banging into gear. It's just there was a bushing in the mechatronics unit that actually had an issue, so it would take a little bit of time before it caught up all the slack and got moving. So it would always felt like it was kind of a jolt when you first got going. This would only happen generally in lower gears coming from a stop to a start, so then it would make sense that you might notice that in reverse as well. About your issue with parking on hills, what I'll say is that's kind of a normal automatic thing, because when basically there's this big gear for on most cars that you would have, that there's a pin that sticks into for when you put the car in park, the pin sticks into the edge of the gear, and when you go on a hill, all the way the vehicle then rolls back onto that pin, and when you're taking it out of park, it's trying to pull that pin back out, and there's a lot of resistance on it. So that's kind of a normal automatic thing, but to resolve that specific thing, you can put the e-brake on when you're on a hill to not make so much pressure roll back onto that pin, just to make it easier to get out of gear. Is the mechatronics covered under warranty? I know some of those cars had either warranty extensions or it might be under powertrain still, so that's something that you'll have to look into. I think if your powertrain, you're probably out by time on powertrain, so the only way that would be covered under warranty is if it was a warranty extension, which honestly I don't recall. So you can check out your local dealer, contact them with your VIN number, mention the issue, talk about your mechatronics. You can talk with them to see if they have anything they can share with you about extensions. If you don't want to go with a dealer, the one thing you might want to do is contact VW customer care instead, because they should be able to help you as well with identifying if you have some sort of trust issue with your local dealer. They should be able to help you identifying at least if there's something out there for the car, and then you can go to your local dealer if you deem that you think there is something out there to make that cover and warranty. Either way, if you have to pay for a mechatronics unit, they are really expensive. You're usually looking at $1,200 or $1,300 for a mech unit. They are pricey to replace. You would need to do all the DSG fluid and have that done, because most people are not going to want to do a mechatronics unit. I think they require coating, and we have to order them by VIN. We can get them for you if you need one, but they would be ordered by VIN, non-returnable, a bunch of stuff like that. But hopefully that helps, and hopefully you don't have a mechatronics unit that's bad, but I think that's probably your issue.
Spinal2111 via YouTube says, I have a question. I started to recently attend track days with my Mark 7 Golf R. I would like to know what a moderate upgrade to the OEM pads fluid would be. Not really concerned about dust, but would like to retain as much pad plus rotor life as the OEM setup. Any advice?
Okay, so we actually just did, funny enough, we just did a front brake DIY on Mark 7. If you haven't seen it, check it out on our page. In regards to pads, this is really hard because you want to maintain a stock pad and rotor feel and attend track days. And to me, this is something that you're literally two polar opposites. You're asking for something that can handle track use, which would be high heat, really aggressive braking for extended periods of time, and something that's factory and you want it to last. So literally you're asking for an ice cream sundae that has 0 calories, 0 fat, and is perfectly healthy like a race cake. That isn't really possible. So you have to kind of make a choice what you want in this situation. You can have either a couple of things. One, you can get a brake setup like what we put on my car, which was slotted stop tech rotors and EBC red stuff pads. Those are more for like sport handling and just general spirited driving. They're going to give you better braking. They're not going to hold up to excessive track use. So depending on, when you say track, I don't know if you're doing like SCCA events, and so it's like short little burst runs, and so maybe red stuff might be okay. But if you're doing like real track day stuff, like on real racetracks, I would say that is not going to be a pad you want to choose. You can go with yellow stuff. But the one thing that you run into with yellow stuff is it's not going to be a good pad for a daily driver. They're going to not work as well when they're cold. They're going to potentially make noise when they're cold. And when I say cold, I mean in lower temperatures where the brakes are not super hot yet. Track pads, part of what makes them able to hold up to all that heat is that they don't function properly or best until they're warm. So you have to get the brakes warm before they actually function properly. They also squeal a bunch a lot of times because they have heavy metallic content on them, or different other metallic, really ceramic contents and stuff like that. So the material mix-up is going to be different depending on the pad, but the net result can be the same, that track pads are going to be something that is not going to be great for daily driving. When we start talking about bedding, now that's something I briefly talked about. I actually intend on making a video specifically about brake bedding aside from the other brake videos I'm doing. But when I talk about bedding, you're supposed to basically take a pad and a rotor and bed them together. There's a mating process that each pad manufacturer has to ensure that they're going to function properly. If you don't bed pads together, they're not going to function to the optimum performance. So what you could do is buy two separate pads, a pad that you use for track and then a pad that you use for street, and then swap them in and out during track days. That's one option. The other option is you can take two completely different brake setups, and that would be, let's say you keep your OEM pads and rotors and you take them off for track days, and then you have like EBC yellow stuff pads and slotted rotors that you use for track days, and then you swap back to the factory ones when you're done with your track day. Obviously, we're talking about a lot of expense when you talk about front and rear rotors to swap back and forth constantly. It also is a lot of work, but that's how you're going to get your best functioning brakes for those days. The other alternative is to go with something like I said, the EBC red stuff with the slotted. That's probably a decent compromise, but keep in mind, if you're going on really heavy track days, they may not hold up and you may end up wasting the money if you're really hard on brakes. Either way, whichever one you do, I would say if you're doing track days, you want to go with brake fluid like the RBF 600 fluid, which I'll link to here where you can check out the RBF 600 that we offer. That would be something you want to look into. So probably what you would want to do is put together a package of brakes. It's pads, rotors, front and rear, possibly stainless steel lines, and then Motul RBF 600 brake fluid, which would withstand the heat that you're looking for. So hopefully that helps answer your question. I know there's kind of a lot of things I covered there, and hopefully that helps your next track day. Oh, I'll also put a link to all of our performance stuff for MK7 Golf Rs here where you can check out more details on that.
Eric Lai via email says, I have a question regarding purchasing a GTI, specifically the 2016 Mk7. While doing extensive research, I came about two types of owners. One owner that is always having a problem with their GTI and another who's having almost no problems. How reliable is a GTI in the short and long term? I read that some owners said they would get rid of their GTI once the factory warranty expires due to possible expenses. I also read that north of 60,000 miles is when more and more problems arise. I know this all depends on how well the car is taken care of, and I want to be able to keep the car for long term.
Okay, so Eric, awesome that you're considering a VW. We've covered a little bit about Mk7 reliability, but I want to kind of touch on a few things about this. First, you mentioned that you say about half the people seem to have a terrible experience and about half of them seem to have a really good experience. Oftentimes, and I don't like to discredit what's said on the internet because there's a lot of great info out there and a lot of forums, and you should always kind of take a lot of that in. But the problem is, people who have problems with stuff are always going to be the most vocal. That's almost generally always true for everything, cars, anything else. The other variable to that is, and I can tell you this from my experience, that some people have really, really unrealistic expectations about cars, especially because they're expensive and you buy a new car and they expect to never have any problems with them. And the reality is that all cars break, 100% of them. It doesn't matter whether you bought a $250,000 car, a $100,000 car, a $70,000 car, or a $15,000 car. If you buy a new car, there's a potential it's going to break. Now, are some more prone to break? No question. But when I hear people talk about that, some cars, sometimes it's their specific experience with that one car, and sometimes it is just, they're crazy about certain things. I can tell you from my personal experience being at dealers, I've seen the whole gamut of things. I specifically recall we had a customer on a car that had a panoramic sunroof. So basically, part of the roof on the car that had a panoramic sunroof was a trim piece that was built into the sunroof frame. So the roof of the car actually had like this tiny little surface scratch on it, and it was a black plastic composite material that was part of the whole roof. And the customer swore up and down they wanted to have this replaced. They went crazy over this tiny little scratch. Well, we had to actually cut the sunroof out of the car to replace that piece, which to me, I would never ever want somebody to cut a sunroof out of my car to fix a minor imperfection in a plastic trim piece. And while that's not ideal, and I understand why you might not have that, that imperfection is much less relevant than cutting out a sunroof and then using the sealant that you use to kind of glue it back in place, and just you take apart a million things to fix a tiny little issue that has more potential to cause problems than than just dealing with what's there. So some people are really hung up on and super anal about some things. Not to say they shouldn't be anal about having a new car and care about what their car is. I'm not saying they shouldn't care about this stuff, but sometimes people go a little overboard is kind of my point. So that's that. You kind of have to take a lot of the stuff with a grain of salt because it doesn't necessarily reflect everybody's experience, because you're really not getting a sample size, especially when you talk about automotive enthusiasts. You know, for every Mark 7 GTI owner who loves cars and is active on the forums, there's probably 8 people out of 10 who aren't on the forums, who are not into modding their car, who just drive a factory car and they enjoy it every day, and you're probably never ever going to hear from them. So, you know, that's kind of how I feel about that. In regards to overall reliability of the Mark 7, I can't really tell you. Mark 7 GTIs have not been out long enough to really accurately predict what the long-term reliability of the car is. On all cars, and that one is no exception, most times you don't see common pattern failures until they reach higher mileage. Like, you know, most of the cars have 50, 60, 70,000 miles. That's when you start to see more pattern failures. At this point, I'm not aware of any common pattern failures on the Mark 7. You know, there's stuff people talk about, the turbos and stuff like that. But aside from that, and I wouldn't even know if I would say that's a pattern failure, because there have been a fair amount that have failed, but it's not all the cars have failing turbos, which would be really the main concern that you would have. Long-term reliability is impossible to predict. Short-term reliability, I would say, is pretty solid. I don't think that there's any really build quality issues. Now, not to say I'm sure someone's going to jump in the comments and say they had a build quality issue. I'm not saying none of them had build quality issues. I'm saying as a general whole that you're not going to find build quality issues. And I would say the Mark 7 is a solid choice to purchase. Now, again, long-term reliability is impossible for me to predict, but it seems like a solid car at this point.
A user on Reddit is looking for advice on a suspension. I've had the Raceland Ultimo coilover kit for my Mark 5 for the last year or so, and I started to hear a thumping sound whenever I turn. My mechanic says the front shocks are most likely shock. Wondering if anyone had some recommendations for new shocks that would work well with the Ultimo springs and threaded sleeve. Thanks. Spring rates for the front are 285 pounds per inch, and the rear is 250 pounds per inch.
Okay, so you're trying to find out replacing coilovers that potentially are bad on your vehicle, and you want to know what the best way to do that. Let's start with this. I actually covered a video that talked about the difference between cheap and expensive coilovers on AskDAP 45, which is the one before this one. Check that out if you haven't seen it and you want to kind of get a little more feel for the difference between less expensive and more expensive. But this would obviously be a decent idea of what the result of buying less expensive coilovers would be. The one thing I'll say is, and I don't know about Raceland, we don't offer Racelands or have a ton of exposure to them specifically. I know a lot of people have them because of the price point they're at. They might have a warranty. So first I would do, you know, that's pretty new coilovers to me. So if you're having an issue in that short a period of time, I would look into that to see if they have some sort of warranty that you can just get one replaced. If they don't and it's not covered in a warranty, first I would start by looking in to see and make sure that it's not the strut bushing or bearing before you proceed. They are common to go bad. The one thing I'll say is if you're not doing your own work, they have to remove the shock and strut assembly to install a new one. So I'm not sure how practical that's going to be if you're paying labor to have somebody remove that assembly just to check it out. So I'm aware that that's obviously kind of a barrier for diagnosing things like that. If that's the case, you may end up be better off financially to just replace the strut bushings, bearings, and front coilovers. Maybe they can just sell you the two. Aside from that, to go with a replacement, I don't think you're going to find like a shock that you can just swap in and out and still keep that sleeve unless Raceland sells a new insert. If that's the case, you can get one from them. If not, you would probably be looking at buying a whole new suspension, which again, like I said, may or may not be necessary, because if it's bushings or bearings, then you would want to definitely address that before going into buying just a whole new suspension. If you decide to go with a whole new suspension, you know, the one thing I'll say is cheap coilovers tend to be more noisy. I've had them on my own personal cars in the past, and like you're describing, on turning, you'll hear kind of a knock noise that will happen in the front suspension. I can tell you that I've known plenty of people with cheap coilovers who spend a boatload of money with bushings and bearings and tracking down control arm bushings and trying to figure out if it's that, to then only come to the conclusion that the coilovers are the things making the problem. So that's obviously one of the major benefits of going with some of the better tier brands of coilover, is you're going to get that peace of mind you have a quality product. I'm not saying it's for everybody, and I understand everybody's budget's going to be different. So just be aware that that is something that you should potentially be prepared for when buying kind of stuff in that price range. Aside from that, you know, the only alternative, and I know in the comments of this question on Reddit, there was a lot of people talking about different coilovers and different cup kits and stuff like that. Somebody mentioned Coney Yellows and some other stuff. I have no idea if they work with those spring perches and stuff. But what they were talking about was some sort of cup kit that was like $1,100. I would say if you're in that $1,100 range, you should probably go with something like a Bilstein PSS kit, or kind of a low-end H&R coilover kit, or one of those top tier brands low-end coilovers. If not, you could always go with something like ST, because they make nice stuff that is still kind of in that mid-range of price, that you can get something that's a pretty solid quality product that's not going to leave you or is not likely to leave you in this type of situation. So hopefully that answers your question. I know it's not super definitive, but it can help you start on the path to tracking down your problem. Thank you for watching episode 46 of the AskDAP show, where we answer your Volkswagen Audi questions. If you have any comments about the questions answered in this show, be sure to leave it in the comments below. If you like this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more like it.